Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Equity-Centered Practice and Suzuki, Part 2. My name is Felicia, and I will be running everything in the background for our session today. For those of you who joined us for Part 1, we're very excited to welcome you back. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we hope that you'll have an opportunity to watch Part 1, and we're very glad that you joined us today for Part 2. So now I'd like to go ahead and get things started by introducing our presenter for today, Tiffany Rice. Tiffany Rice is an avid musician, educator, and DE&I practitioner. She currently works at the Buckingham Browne and Nichols School as the Middle School Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Global Education practitioner. Prior to her time at BB&N, she held faculty and administrative roles at various schools in Massachusetts and South Carolina, Director of El Sistema at the Conservatory Lab Charter School, the Performing Arts Director at the Windsor School, and the Carolina String Academy Program Coordinator at the Ashley Hall School. Tiffany has also served on the violin faculty for intensive summer programs such as the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute and the Los Angeles Philharmonic's Yola National Festival. Passionate about string education and pedagogy, she holds a BME, MM, and Performer Diploma from the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music, where she studied violin and violin pedagogy. She completed her Suzuki teacher training at the Ithaca Suzuki Institute in 2008. Tiffany, thank you so much for coming back to be with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, or good afternoon. It's afternoon where I am, but hello, Happy New Year to all of you. I'm so excited to be here. For those of you that were part of my first session, welcome back. For those of you that are joining in for the first time, it's wonderful to spend this time with you. And before I begin, I just want to say some thank yous. I'm so grateful to the Suzuki Association of the Americas, particularly Angelica Cortez, Christy Felsing, Laura Yasuda, and I'm extremely grateful to Alfred Music as well, Felicia Elanum, Heather Meyer, and Danae Witter. And I want to thank our translators today, Susanna Manjaras and Luis Dorado. Thank you so much. And just thank you to all of you. Like I said, I'm excited to spend time and to do some learning today. I'll be talking to you. Obviously, this is a webinar format, but there will be lots of opportunities for you to engage with the chat. So feel free to share what you're comfortable sharing. And if you're somebody that likes to take notes, I hope you have a notepad or can just take notes on your device. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So we're going to start with a critical check-in. And a critical check-in is just an opportunity for us to, our days are so busy. It's just an opportunity for us to focus and think about what we're going to be doing today and to get a sense of where we are. So all the questions I'm going to ask, there are 4 of them, can be answered on a 10-point scale. 10 is very and 1 is not very. So our first question today is, there we go. How present are you for this experience on a scale of 1 to 10? And you can put that answer in the chat if you feel comfortable, or you can just jot it down at home. Up to you. Let's see. See what people are saying. Okay, oh, I'm getting some 10s. This is exciting. Ooh, 10. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm on Dancing with the Stars. This is so exciting. All right, let's go on to our next. Lots of 10s, some 7s. Okay, I see. Great. Our second question, how committed are you to developing and maintaining a sustainable equity practice? So again, you can answer on a 10-point scale. Good, I'm seeing more 10s. Oh my goodness, this is so great. Lots of 10s, wonderful. All right, third question. Let me move all my windows. How comfortable are you thinking about how your various identities inform your teaching practice? Okay, good. Seeing some 10s and 8, 9. Wonderful. And then our last question, our last critical check-in question, how ready are you to explore ways to reflect and offer insight to students' lived experiences and identities? All right, well, I'm even more pumped than I was a few minutes ago. So this is wonderful to see. This is great. And you'll see, I'm going to be talking about the book, The Identity Conscious Educator. So you see the little image in the corner. You might want to jot down that, that title and author, but this activity comes from that text. So let's review today's goals. We're going to review the meaning of equity and its importance in music education. We're going to explore the meaning of identity consciousness and its importance in your teaching practice. And we're going to explore the benefits and identify opportunities to provide windows and mirrors in your program or studio. And I love to tie in a Suzuki quote. I was a Suzuki teacher for many, many years, and I'm still a Suzuki teacher at heart. And so today's quote is, "Knowledge is not skill. Knowledge plus 10,000 times is skill." And so that's just a reminder that the information that we receive today and we talk about today has to be put into practice, and we know the benefits and the necessity of repetition. So that's just a reminder for all of us. All right. And just to review, in my first session, we talked about the difference between equity and equality, and we answered three key questions. What is equity? Why is it important? And how does it connect to Suzuki's philosophy? And so for those of you that are maybe in the car or don't have your screen available, I have an image on the screen that really, I think, demonstrates really well the difference between equity and equality. And this image has mirrored graphics. So on the left side, we have a tree with some leaves and some red circles, which appear to be fruit. And on the right side, we have the same tree. And then underneath both trees, we have three individuals. One individual is tall, one individual is medium height, and then one individual is shorter. And so on one side, we see that all three individuals, despite their height, are receiving the same step stool to be able to reach the fruit that's hanging off of the lowest branch. And as a result, only the tallest person can reach that. And then on the right-hand side, where the tree, we see the same three individuals. However, they are given crates or step stools that are appropriate to their height so that they can all reach the fruit. And that's really what equity is. Equity is giving people the tools and resources they need to achieve or succeed, and removing the barriers to those tools and resources. And it is important because our job as educators is to reach every student that we work with and every family that we work with. And what we know and what we're going to talk about in today's session is that every child, every family is different, and that's based on their identities. And because every child is different, they need different things to be able to succeed. And so it's important that we recognize this and that we actively work to make sure that we are giving every student what they need to be successful. And how does it connect to Suzuki's philosophy? Well, the philosophy is, about talent education, and that every child can succeed, given that they have the tools and the support to do so. And so that is what our work is today and going forward. And just a reminder, as we prepare for our equity practices, I kind of think about three things that we need to keep in mind. The importance of listening, similar to when we practice with our students or practice at home. It's so important to listen to what we're talking to today. When you go back to your programs or to your colleagues, like the importance of listening to your families and students. Encouragement is also so important. Oftentimes this work can ebb and flow, and there can be moments where it's really challenging. And so we need people in our lives, people that we can use as accountability partners that can help keep us encouraged and along the way, and help us when things go well, give that encouragement, and also give the encouragement when things are a little tougher. And then lastly, the importance of repetition. This is not something that you do once and you get to say, check, aced it, nailed it. This requires ongoing practice and ongoing work and ongoing attention. So just, I want to recap the practices that we talked about in the first session back in December. The first practice was about using asset-based language and mindset and the importance of that. And then the second practice was to think outside of the box in terms of removing barriers in your program, and how can we use creative thinking to make things more accessible for students. And then today, I already mentioned that we're going to be talking about identity conscious practice for our third equity practice. And I've got a quote from Dr. Liza Talusan. "The work of an educator, teaching, leading, advising, coaching, and collaborating, is not identity neutral." And so I love that quote, and that essentially sums up the text that we're going to be talking about today. So identity consciousness, like I said, I recommend that you write down the name of this book. It's a wonderful text because it's a workbook style. And essentially, Dr. Toulousan, who is, she's local to the Boston area, which is really nice. She's a professor at UMass Boston. She's a DEI practitioner. She's an author. She's a speaker. She's a coach. She really does it all. And in this book, she really talks about, just drives home the point that who people are informs what they do, how they act and interact with others, and how they see the world around them. And it's so simple, yet it's something that we can forget about. And so when we really, really understand this and dive into this, that is how we can start to develop our own identity conscious practice. So today we're going to focus on these two questions. What does it mean to be identity conscious? And how do your various identities inform and impact your work with students and families? So let's keep going. So I've got sorry, I'm trying to move this bubble out of the way. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between identity conscious and identity neutral. And sometimes it's easier to start with the opposite and then define what identity consciousness is. So when we think about identity neutral, it's the idea that people's differences do not affect how we interact with others. And it's thinking like we're not acknowledging differences, we're treating everyone the same, and we're requiring non-dominant groups to assimilate to dominant norms and identities. Now, what we want and what we're working towards is the exact opposite of that, which is identity consciousness. People's differences matter. Every single one of us in this webinar is different. Every single person that will view this after it's recorded, we are all different. We all have different experiences. And so as an identity conscious educator, it's important to acknowledge those differences. It's important to value the differences as well. It's not enough to just name them. We have to value them. And then we have to support groups to maintain their culture and practices. So in a nutshell, that's what this book is about. And like I mentioned, it's a workbook type, it's a workbook text. And so what it does is every chapter is an opportunity for you to focus on a specific identity, work through some activities and reflection questions. So today we're just going to do like a little general taste about that, just to give you a sense. But I first thought we'd do a little activity for us to really think more about what does identity neutral look like versus identity conscious. So I've got 5 statements that I'm going to show you. I'll do one at a time. And in the chat, I would love if you feel comfortable or are able to do so safely, I would love for you to just type whether you think the statement is identity neutral or identity conscious. So here's our first one. I just see the students in my orchestra as musicians. It doesn't matter where they come from or what color they are. When they sit down in my orchestra, I give everyone the same fair treatment. All right, so in the chat, can you type whether you think that's identity neutral or identity conscious? I'm seeing a lot of neutrals. Yes, ding, 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 exactly. So that's an identity neutral statement. And it's neutral because we're not acknowledging the differences that people bring to any group, right? And so that's one of those questions or statements that's it's interesting to think about, because I think some people would say that and think that, you know, it's promoting fairness and that's what's really important. But when we go back to that equity image, that equity versus equality graphic that I showed earlier, when we give everybody the same, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to achieve the things that they need to. All right, so let's go for a second one. Here's the second statement. Attendance is mandatory for Saturday morning group classes. I make exceptions and provide alternative group options for the Jewish and Seventh-day Adventist families in my program. So why don't you mention whether you think that's identity neutral or identity conscious? You're all acing this. Yes, identity conscious. Right. Right. Oh, thanks. I love the people that have abbreviated it. Yes, great. Exactly. So this statement is identity conscious because we're acknowledging the differences that are within our program, and we're making accommodations for these community members to be able to participate in the program while honoring their faith traditions. All right. Next one. My Brazilian student speaks Portuguese at home with their family. I asked them to teach me a few keywords in Portuguese that I can use when writing their weekly practice notes to help them better understand my instructions. Identity neutral or identity conscious? Yes, Exactly. Identity conscious. We're acknowledging the fact that the student speaks more than one language and has a primary language that they use at home. And then the teacher is using this as an opportunity to not only bridge a relationship, like learn more about that student's culture and language, um, but also an opportunity to again help the student to bridge the gap and help the student achieve better understanding. Great. All right, you all are crushing it. Let's go on to the next statement. Let me move the chat over here. All right. I require all of my students to memorize their solo pieces for recital performances. If they practice hard enough, they should be able to do it. There was no hesitation. Neutral, neutral, neutral. Right, exactly. This is an identity neutral statement. And this is one that might give some people pause, is they might think, well, yeah, I set high expectations. I want my students to memorize their pieces. However, it might be overlooking our neurodiverse students. There might be learning conditions that make it more challenging for students to memorize. And as a result, that can have a domino effect. If there's a student that for which memorizing pieces and performing successfully is a challenge. When they get up and either they try to perform and they make lots of mistakes, that impacts the student's confidence in themselves as a player. Or if it's one of those situations where the piece isn't considered ready, if it's not memorized, that that prohibits the student from fully participating in the program, and that can be problematic too. And I have to own this was something that I used to be stuck on earlier in my career, is thinking that part of a polished performance was getting up and doing it memorized. And I really had to stop and interrogate that and think, like, why does that really matter? What is the important part of the student's performance experience? So I wanted to name that in case that resonated with anybody in the room. All right. And for our final one, I make an effort to include more pieces written by BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, and women composers in my teaching to reflect the demographics of my program and community. So you can type in whether you think that's identity conscious, identity neutral. Exactly. So I see a couple of ICs. Exactly. Yeah, that's an identity conscious statement. Again, we are recognizing the need for representation. We want to reflect the community and the demographics of our program, and we're doing that by increasing our representation in our repertoire. Okay, all right, you all crushed that. So when we think about identity consciousness, we have to think about our own identities, right? We can't do this work without actually being able to name what some of these identities are. So for this next exercise, this does not have to go in the chat. You only put what you're comfortable with. But I have a list here of many identifiers that people may hold. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are things that are not on there. And I couldn't include everything just because the list could go on and it would become probably visually overwhelming. And I encourage you to just take a few minutes. We won't take too long, but I would love for you to just, on a piece of paper, on your device, whatever, or maybe you're just thinking through, create a list of the identities you hold based on some of these identifiers. And again, if there are identities that are not, if there are categories that are not represented here, that's completely fine. Feel free to add them. But I'll give us just a little bit of time right now for you to jot those down and just to kind of locate yourself. All right. So as you finish up writing, we had a chance to make a list of what our identities are. And now we're going to have an opportunity to locate them as well. So I've got this diagram. And like I said, if you have paper in front of you, wonderful. Feel free to make this image too. I have 3 concentric circles. And if you're someplace where it's not safe to type, don't worry about it. You can just think about it, or maybe you can revisit this at another time. But in the circles, we're going to use the diagram to locate the identities that you just named. So in that inner circle, that little small lavender, like really light lavender circle, you're going to write the identities you hold closest to you at your core. In the middle circle, you're going to write the identities that you hold close but are not at the core of who you are. And in that outer circle, which is more dark purple, you are going to write down the identities you hold that are a little bit more distant to you. So I'll give you a moment to do that as well, if you so choose. And if you don't, if you're typing on a device, you can just kind of list them in categories like inner circle, middle circle, outer circle. All right. And if you're still writing, that is completely fine. I'm just going to show you what came up for me. So I did this activity obviously beforehand. But at the core of my identity, like the identities I hold the closest to me are my identities as Black, as cis female, and as Christian. And then as I pan out to my middle circle, my socioeconomic class identifies middle class. I'm straight, I'm able bodied. I hold an advanced degree, so my education has become kind of in that middle circle, just given the line of work that I do. And then in my outer circle, the identities that are more distant for me, I grew up in a two-parent household. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a native English speaker, and I am a Midwesterner. And so, when I've done this list before, I've done activities like this before, but what I've started to realize is, you know, um, the identities for me, like it was interesting to kind of see my proximity to some of my identities. And what I noticed is the identities that are in the outer circle also happen to be identities in which I am part of the dominant group. So, for instance, my identity as a US citizen, I was born here, I was born in Michigan, I'm a citizen, I'm a native English speaker, and that also happens to be obviously the official language of the US. So it's an identity that's important to me, but it's something that is not it's more distant when I'm here in the States, and it's when I travel abroad where it becomes more relevant to me. And I'm recognizing that I am not, necessarily speaking the native language in the country in which I'm visiting. So that's something also that I've been, exploring more about myself. Um, the idea of that the fact the non-dominant identities that I hold are actually the ones that are closest to me and are the lens through which I kind of carry myself and navigate through the world. And so I'm curious about, you don't have to answer this in the chat, but I welcome you to think about that as you complete this diagram. Like, what is that saying? What are you noticing from the way that you relate to your identities? And what's important to remember is that, again, the identities that we hold are the lens through which we see the world, how we navigate um, circumstances, situations, and how we interact with people. And so, some big questions for us to think about are: how comfortable are you talking about identity with others? It's one maybe it's very comfortable for you to talk about it amongst colleagues. Maybe it's not so comfortable for you to talk about with your students. Or can you talk about different aspects of your identity with your family? Like it's really interesting to take an audit of that and find out what you're thinking. And thank you. Somebody put theirs in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. And military family background. I see that. I didn't put that on there as one of the identifiers, but thank you for bringing that up. Yes. So I encourage you to think about, again, your comfort level with talking about these identities and what that might look like depending on who you're talking with. That's something that the book explores. Another question that I have for you is: what identities do your students and families hold? Do you know? Are there opportunities for families and students to be able to share that? Without again making assumptions like that. It can be really interesting. Like, people may present as a certain identity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's one that they resonate with. And then the big question too that you can think about is: what is your proximity to these identities? And that will impact again the lens with which we approach our equity work as well. If you're approaching the work from, identity X and recognizing that the members of your community are identity Y or Z or whatever the letter is, that's important to know so that you can um, be aware of what gaps may come up in that thinking. Um, so thank you for that. I'm sorry, I'm seeing the chat. I'm getting distracted by the chat. Thank you for those that are entering. I'm going to keep my eye on the prize. So those are just some questions for you to think about. And again, I'm putting the name of the book. I'm making it's actually not a shameless plug. It's a really wonderful text, and we're using it. The teachers at my school are engaging in this work. It's something that's been really, really helpful for me. And as I've gone through some of this work, like for instance, I realized that like my relationship with socioeconomic status has been something that I have to think about, and my comfort level of talking with about that um, with different people is different. So that's something that I've been interrogating on my own. All right, so let's take a moment now. We can come back to the chat, do a little bit of a temperature check. I'm curious, what's coming up for you right now? And maybe what's coming up for you is like, yeah, done this, right on. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe this is something that you haven't thought so much about. I'm just curious where you are with that. Um, I'm curious, where are the opportunities for developing your identity conscious practice? Are there opportunities for you? Or maybe there are barriers that you're facing that are preventing you from being able to do this work the way that you would like. So I would love to hear some feedback or see some feedback in the chat if you're comfortable sharing. So somebody shared that they have socioeconomic opportunities they can work on. I need to work on. Yeah, that was one. Thank you for sharing that, because that again that came up for me, and I talk about identity all the time. It's part of my work, and I realize that that is one area, and I think that's due to me working in independent schools for so long. The majority of my career has been working in independent schools where the clientele is mostly upper class, not entirely, but mostly. And so it's something that's not really talked about. Great. I'm seeing some other things, more awareness about how these are important to be cognizant of and to be an effective teacher versus mine. Yes. Oh, thank you. Who said it? Thought it was interesting what you put in your inner circle versus mine. Your outer circle was almost the same. Yeah. So that's everybody's kind of proximity map or chart, whatever, is going to look different. It's completely different, and it might change depending on where you are in your life, right? I think maybe 20 years ago, I don't know if I would have necessarily if I would have categorized or located things in the same way. Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you to the person who said age-related health and finances. Thank you for those that are sharing. I really appreciate that. Oh, great question. Do we extend the same equity to teacher colleagues, for example, elderly, disabled, those with chronic illness? How do we value teachers with these identities? Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's Anne Marie. Thank you so much for that. I'm focusing a lot on students and families, but absolutely all of this applies to everyone that we work with. And that's a really excellent question. And the answer is sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't extend the same to our colleagues and adults. So thank you for bringing that up. I've enjoyed learning more about, okay. So I'm seeing that somebody's enjoying learning about the diverse students that they have in their program. Yes, there are many topical webinars during the pandemic in the Francis Clark Center. Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, thank you. All right, so thank you for these. And somebody mentioning that piano can become economically exclusive. This is an added issue. Yes, yes. Thank you for that. So feel free to keep writing things in the chat. I'm going to go on to our next practice just to keep us on track for our end time. But thank you for these comments. I really appreciate it. Our fourth practice is mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And here's a quote that I'd like to read. The delightful truth is that sometimes when we hear another out, glancing through the window of their humanity, we can see our own image reflected in the glass of their window. The window becomes a mirror. And it is the shared humanity of our conversation that most impresses us, even as we attend to our different frames of reference. And that quote comes from Emily Stile in her piece, Listening for All Voices. I believe it's a book. And Emily works for the National Seed Project. And this idea of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors actually comes from the National Seed Project. SEED stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. I just received my SEED facilitator training this summer. So that was actually where I discovered that I had less comfort talking about socioeconomic class. So I encourage you to go to like Google National Seed Project, go to their website. If you're interested in joining, it's an opportunity to engage in learning with in a community of people about equity and diversity. And so I encourage you to check and see if there are groups in your neighborhood. My school has Seed. Maybe your school or community will have a Seed chapter as well. So What are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors? This term was originally applied to literature, so we use it a lot when we're talking about texts, books for students, particularly, children's books, but for any text. When we talk about mirrors, we're looking at any opportunity to reflect a person's identity, culture, and lived experience, right? So it's a chance to hold up a mirror and see yourself represented and your lived experience represented. Windows are opportunities that offer a view into someone else's identity, culture, and lived experience. So rather than seeing something that reflects you, it's an opportunity to learn about what somebody else is experiencing. And then the concept of sliding glass doors, I really love. Sliding glass doors allow you to enter and become part of someone else's world. And that's really important too, because if you have too much of one, right? If you have too much of the mirror and we're just seeing ourselves, that can promote vanity, right? And if you have too much of the window where we're only looking at other people's experiences, that can sometimes feel like voyeurism, and that can put us in an uncomfortable place. So I love the idea of sliding glass doors where it really allows you to enter and become a part of somebody else's world. And that idea of immersion, I think, is really where the learning and the compassion is developed. And so let's talk a little bit about, oh, I wanted to do an example. That's right. So again, this idea of windows and mirrors, you can use it with literature, you can use it with art, and of course you can use it with music, and that's what we'll be talking about. But I have an image up here. This is a painting called Cleaning Nopalitos, Cleaning Cactus, by the artist Carmen Lomas Garza. And I just want you to take a moment and look at this image. Soak it in. And for those of you that are maybe not able to see your screen, what we have is a man in overalls sitting in a chair. It looks like, and he's with a little girl. And they're in looks like a screened in porch of some sort. And he's sitting in a chair. He's got a box full of like cactus waste, a bucket, and he's got a knife and he is cleaning cactuses. So he's removing the spikes, is that what they're called, off the cactus. And the little girl has her elbow on the table and is kind of resting her head in her hands as she watches. And so from this picture, I'm assuming that the man is her father, and that's the daughter. And so when I look at this picture, I'll just give an example of what the windows and mirrors are for me. When I look at this picture, the windows I see are, one, I've never seen anybody clean a cactus before. So I've never seen somebody take this approach to clean off all the spikes and make sure that it's smooth and cut them up. So that's a different experience for me. The mirror for me though is the little girl looking at this man do this work. And the mirror for me is kind of how I used to interact with my dad when I was little. And when he would come home from work, that was pretty much the stance I would have when he would eat dinner. I would just kind of sit there and like watch him eat. Or when he would polish his shoes on Sunday night, before the work week would start, I would do that same thing. So that was a mirror that reminded me of the relationship that I had with my dad. And I'm curious if you feel comfortable putting in the chat, what are some of the windows and mirrors that come up for you? Great. I see a question about states like banning of books. Do you have recommendations of any sources to address this? So that's something that we can readdress that question at the end, most definitely, because that is definitely a larger issue. Um, but yeah, so it doesn't look like anybody is putting in their windows and mirrors, which is fine, so we can move on. But I just want to illustrate for you the idea that my window can also so easily lend to a mirror, or you can look at an image and be able to receive both. All right, I have one more image, which is a little bit more complex. This is an image that came from the New York Times. And, oh, sorry, let me remove the chat. And this image came from the New York Times, and it is an image of Afghan girls lined up to have their nails painted by an American soldier who joined German troops during a long-term patrol in the mountainous region of Faizabad, east of Kunduz, Afghanistan. And so take a moment again to just look at this image. And I'm curious where some windows and where some mirrors come up for you. I can tell you for me, the window is I'm not in the military. I've never served in the military. So I'm thinking about from the context of an American troop that's a window for me to see that experience and how you engage with the local community. I've also, when I think about the window into the experience of these Afghan children and what it is like to live in a community where you have military that are patrolling and occupying your area, and what that is like and how you interact with the military that's there. And the mirror for me is actually the nail painting, and nail painting is something that I love. And so that mirror for me reminds me of when I was a kid again, and my mom would paint my nails, and because I couldn't do it myself without making a complete mess. And fast forwarding even into my teaching career, where I used to run a nail art club at my school, and some of my students would actually, ask me to paint their nails because it was too hard for them to do. But I'm reminded, in that mirror is of that connection that I made with students in that process. So I'm curious what might be coming up for you. Compassion on the part of the military member, providing a fun luxury for those young girls in the war-torn land. Yeah. I'm reminded of times I waited in line for something I wanted. Oh, thank you. That's a really great one. Yes. Yeah. That's great. Uh-huh. Thank you for that. So again, that's just another illustration of how an image, a picture, a story can be an opportunity to learn something about someone else and also reflect back some of your own experience. So let's talk a little bit about why mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and how we can do that in the music world. So why, when we think about mirrors, representation matters, right? Seeing yourself represented is affirming. It can help with positive identity development, and it's so, so, so important. It also increases a sense of belonging. When you see yourself represented in places, you feel like you belong there, and things seem possible and attainable for you. And then when we think about all of these, particularly sliding glass doors, it helps us understand the world around us, right? We can't base our understanding of the world based on things that we assume, or from very, limited, narrow glimpses into lives. So it's an opportunity for us to understand what other people are experiencing. And when one quick story about that, I think, like when I think about a mirror for me. Like my first mirror in classical music was when I think I was 16. It was in high school. I was living in Indianapolis at the time, and my dad got tickets to go see the symphony, and I had the pleasure of seeing the pianist Abadajan Pratt, who is a black pianist. It was my first time ever seeing a black soloist playing with an orchestra, and it was so impactful because I'm sitting in this concert hall that I've been to before, and just seeing Mr. Pratt there and playing with, like, it's such a beautiful piece. He played a Beethoven Piano Concerto number 3. It really had such an impact on my life because it made me feel like I belong in this world. And what's also interesting is like the feeling and the sentiment that I have attached to that piece, because I now associate that with hearing him perform it. And so there's real power in that, and there's real power in, opportunities that you can give your students and your families, and how they can associate all of this and have it be connected, to feel that sense of belonging. And so the question is how, right? Repertoire is obviously our main opportunity for this, and so we can choose repertoire that reflects the members of your program and the community. It can also provide a window into other identities and music that they compose or that they write and that they enjoy. You can also think beyond that, though. Representation of staffing, guest artists, like who are the people that you have surrounding you in your program. So because it's important to also see people working there. Like, yeah, I can be a student, and it's important for me to see other Black students. That's very important. It's also important for me to look up and see Black adults who are working in this program and making things happen. Or it's important to bring in guest artists so I can see people practicing their art who look like me. And there's also a real opportunity with community partnership. I think particularly when we think about sliding glass doors and, entering into somebody else's world, if you engage in true partnership, that's really an opportunity for that to happen. And I think that's something that's exciting. You know, I had built something. I had created a platform for that, and right before COVID, unfortunately, it didn't end up working out. But I think there's real power in allowing students to engage in that. I see some things in the chat. Okay, let's see here. Oh, thank you for these. Okay, all right, all right. I'm gonna keep moving. All right. Um, So one warning though, if you were in my first session, I showed you this image. When we think about our identity, when we think about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, it's really important that we check our bias. And remember, some people think about bias like we think about our tonsils. When they get swollen, we remove them, and then we no longer have discomfort or pain. And that bias is kind of the same way. Like, ooh, I recognize that I have this bias. I check it and now I'm done. I never have to worry about that. And unfortunately, it is not the same practice. When we think about the biases that we hold, it's more like plaque. And plaque is something that builds up on our teeth every day as a result of just eating and just, being alive. So we have to engage in ongoing oral hygiene. We have to floss, we have to brush every day to remove that. And so we have to think about that as well when we think about what images, what are we portraying in the windows and in the mirrors and the sliding glass doors? Are you inadvertently perpetuating stereotypes or perpetuating one narrative of a particular identity? So that's something that you should really, really think about and interrogate, because sometimes, with our best of intentions, we end up um, doing the exact opposite because we just weren't aware of how things are perceived. So if your goal in your program is to really focus on, you know, um, more mirrors for your BIPOC community members and more windows into the BIPOC experience, that is wonderful. I just really encourage and urge you to focus more on the joy, the resilience, and the excellence. That narrative is what needs to be perpetuated more, and not necessarily the plight and of somebody's identity. That's important to understand, but that isn't the only. That's not how people need to be defined. So let's see. I think we're doing okay on time. We're going to do another let's chat. All right. So we're just going to do a time out for a second, and a chance for you to put in the chat what's coming up for you now. Maybe windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors is a new concept for you, which is cool. So I'd love to know about that. If it's something that you're already thinking about, I'd love to know about that as well. I'd also love to know, where are the opportunities and barriers for students and families to see themselves reflected in your programs and studios? Where are the opportunities and barriers for students to gain insight into someone else's lived experience? So feel free to answer one, all of those questions. I'd love to see what you're thinking right now. Let's see. Somebody said, I'd love to add some exposure to guest artist performances in my lessons. Yes, there isn't much time for a 30-minute lesson. Do you have any suggestions? Um, that's a really great question too. And I know time is always an issue. I think about my second private teacher used to hold workshops, and so, like, maybe once every few months, she would hold a workshop. And the workshop was for the whole studio to come together. It was kind of community building, and it would have a specific focus. So maybe holding a workshop on a special day, or maybe that takes the place of a group class if you do group classes, or maybe it's something that you just stream and people can access it on their own time. But I think creating special opportunities for that to bring people in can be an opportunity for that. Or maybe did I misunderstand the question? Oh, okay, right. Okay, I think I did understand that. Yeah. So maybe just creating a separate event um, can be that opportunity. Okay. All right. Thanks, Amy. Sorry, I'm trying to read real fast. um, okay, great. The windows metaphor really makes sense to me as just finding the balance among the three categories. Great, great, great. All right. And then it looks like somebody has, oh, somebody's put a resource checking out the artist who performed in the Syncopated Saturday Night. Oh, cool. A boogie woogie performer for a community event. Oh, I bet that was. That sounds amazing. Yes. That's really wonderful. Yeah, and I think and what's really great is there's so many artists, right? Like it's like teachers and people are looking for artists and artists are looking for opportunities. So I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration here, and I think that's something that gets exciting. So I think that's wonderful. Keep those ideas coming. Again, we're just about out of time, so I just want to move on to our next things, make sure we have a chance for a final reflection. But thank you for these comments. I see some more coming in. Duke Ellington songs. Yes, yes. Um, so just to recap, some things that we can do to maintain our practice, like really diving into developing your identity conscious practice. And that's something that's ongoing. And even though you might be somebody that thinks like I reflect on my identity all the time, there's always more work we can do. There's always more reflection because we will uncover something new every single time. That's I think pretty much guaranteed. I encourage you to be thoughtful and intentional about creating mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors and opportunities for those in your programs. And if you're anytime you're talking about identity, you have to be ready to learn and practice how to have courageous conversations with people because conflicts will come up and people will have different ideas, different approaches. They will respond differently. And it's important that you have tools to be able to engage in those conversations so that you can reach understanding. Courageous Conversations is another great text, similar to the Identity Conscious Educator. It is a workbook format. It's by Glenn Singleton. I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already had a chance to do so. And then lastly, but not least, is maintaining cultural humility. We don't know what we don't know. And that just goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is an ongoing practice, it's ongoing work. And so we will gain knowledge, we'll gain experience, and then we'll still have things that we just don't know. And we don't know that we don't know them. And as a little reminder, right, my favorite Suzuki quote, you don't have to practice every day, only on the days you eat. So I encourage you to develop a community where you can kind of hold each other and keep each other accountable so that you can move forward in your equity practice. And lastly, we won't do 5 minutes, but we'll do a few minutes. We're going to try something different this time, actually. We're going to try one of those chat waterfalls. For our final reflection, I'd like to use the head, heart, hand framework. So for head, what is on your mind right now after hearing all this information? What are you thinking about? For heart, what are you feeling right now? And for hand, what action do you want to take now? So the way that the chat waterfall works is you can type your response to one or more. It's up to you, but we're going to hit send. When I say go, we'll hit send all at the same time and we can see the responses. So just to repeat, you're going to answer one or all of those prompts. It's totally up to you, but we're going to hit send all at the same time. So why don't you take a moment to type your answer? And then when I say go, we'll hit send and do it all at the same time and see what people are thinking and feeling. Great. And one comment that just really resonated with me. Somebody said, I'm retiring and I have a few students left, but still want to find these expanded experience for them and myself. And I really appreciate that because even if you just have one student, they need that experience. So thank you to Linan for writing that. I really appreciate that. Listen more. I love this. I love this. Grateful to see so many colleagues interested in this topic. There's work to be done, responsibility to others. Memories of cluelessness over the year, feeling motivated and inspired. Yes. Aha. Being part of other organizations that need more. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. All right. Oh, and then the comment, Hispanic music is not represented enough, except in mariachi music. That is true, right? Seeing where the gaps are. Thank you. I appreciate all these comments. I'm going to say thank you so much because I want to allow some time for some questions, but I want to thank each and every one of you that are here right now or anybody that will be watching this video in the future. Thank you so much for your engagement today and for really taking the time to think about this and hopefully take these ideas to build into your practice. I say this and I really mean it. It is so important for us to have a network, and I wish I could see your faces, but feel free to reach out via email. Some of you did that after the last session, and you have no idea how exciting that is for me to receive. So yes, I welcome emails, love to hear what you're up to. Thank you so much. And if you would like to see just a list of resources and citations, the list is not beautiful, but there they are. I want to make sure I give credit because it takes research to get this stuff done. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and want to open it up for questions. And just thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Hi, Tiff. For anyone who doesn't
Hello.
know me, my name is Angelica. I'm just going to do a quick moderated session here. So if you have any further questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat or use the Q&A feature. But maybe we can backtrack, Tiff, to some of the original questions that kind of came in. So bubbling up for me is the fact that in some states, legislation is banning books and preventing discussions of diversity. What recommended resources might you have, Tiff?
Right. So that's something that I'd actually have to follow up because there are resources, and I know that there's a banned books week actually, and I think it happens in September, late September, where across the nation people are really coming together and just talking about that. And so I'm going to get the name of the organization wrong. I'm going to get it incorrect, but there's like the National Library. There's a national library. I'll have to consult our school librarian, who's fantastic, but she has made me aware of this website and organization, and they have some tools and resources for really countering that. Because you're right, they're banning books. I saw somebody said they're banning jingle bells, like they're banning books and they're banning conversations that our kids want and need to have. And so I'm happy to follow up actually. Our librarian is currently out, but I'm happy to follow up with some links and some resources. So if you reach out, I'm happy to try to connect you with those.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this one's really important too, how to explore diverse repertoire without being condescending or putting your foot in it. I think that's something that comes up often for us.
Right. That's a really great point too. And I think I'm glad, like, you should have that question, right? Because we don't want anything to feel tokenized. We don't want anything to feel appropriated. And so I think this is an opportunity when you're engaging and, when you're trying to feature more diverse music, this is an opportunity to bring in people who identify, right? Center the culture that you're trying to feature. So that's an opportunity to bring in guest artists, bring in a composer, bring in somebody who can really speak to that experience, who can help bring people in. Again, it's like the sliding glass door. So it's more than just, oh, we played this piece and I Wikipedia'd it and I know a little bit about it, but really get an opportunity to learn more about what went into it, how elements of the culture are being spoken through that piece. So that's probably my shortest and most important suggestion for that one.
Yeah, that's great. And I also feel like, Tiffany, we've talked too about just the importance of kind of naming the experience, right? And saying, like, naming this might feel a little bit awkward right? I think that that's part of the importance of that identity association and really starting to get comfortable with your identity, being able to name your identity and say,
yes,
I feel awkward because of my identity right now, or I feel uncomfortable discussing this, right? So I think it ties back into that kind of identity practice that you were talking about.
absolutely, absolutely. And it takes work to even be, like you said, to be able to name that, because sometimes we think that we have that comfort level, and we would like to think that we have that comfort level, and then sometimes the reality is different, and that's okay. But like you said, naming it is really important.
Right. And actually, I guess along those lines, someone talked about, I think you covered this just a little bit, but I want to make sure we covered a little further. Guest artist performances. So, we've got 30 minutes in our lessons, and in those 30 minutes, especially if you're working at a school, you've got 30 minutes to teach these kids how to play this really tough run on, say, song, whatever it is.
Right.
So what do you do? What are some of the things you do in addition to the workshop idea that you offered? Some of the things that you do to make sure that you're covering those practices?
Well, if I can't bring in guest artists, I do try to just feature videos. So even if it's like and I hate saying exposure, but exposure is better than not exposing, right? So
Mm.
opportunities for listening, for seeing. YouTube is an amazing resource for finding artists, or reaching out to artists and saying like, okay, maybe we can't work out a full 30-minute session, but do you have a clip? Like working out a relationship with that artist, because maybe at one point you can come, or maybe the artist has an event and you galvanize your program and it's like, hey, let's encourage everyone to go, or help make an opportunity for people to go and experience community in that way. um, what I have done though has been, uh, and again, I was within a structure where I could do this, but I did kind of an overhaul, and I would just say like, guess what, lessons are going to look different this week because I think this is really important. And so your private lesson may not be a private lesson, it might be this, but we have this opportunity to learn from these amazing artists, and that's just as important as us working on Go Tell It Rhodey. so,
Yeah,
so
yeah, right.
um, again, I know that not everybody has that luxury. I know it gets complicated when you think about like payment structure. People are paying for private lessons, but I think if you can help your families and your community understand the validity and the importance of it, I think you have some leverage there.
Yeah, a lot of it just feels like it's values based, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Great. Okay, well, I think that brings us right up to the top of the hour. So with that, I want to make sure I say a huge thank you to our partners, Alfred, and of course, and of course to my team over at the SIA, and most importantly to you, Tiffany. This was such an amazing session, part 2. And I know that in the chat there is the link to part 1. We'll also be sending the link out for part 2. But in any case, Tiffany, huge thank you. And thanks to everyone who attended and was willing to share out, be vulnerable with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Angelica, and the Suzuki Association of the Americas, Alfred Publishing. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm so grateful, and I hope you have a wonderful start to your new year.
Thanks so much, everyone. Happy New Year. And
Bye.
thanks to our wonderful translators, Luis, Susanna.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank
Thank you
you,
to our
thank you, thank
translators.
you.
That's so important.
We can't hear you, but we see you, and we appreciate you.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. I'm going to hang out here just for those final remaining people who are adding to the chat. Tiffany, thank you so much for your time. And like they mentioned, we're going to send out links and videos and everything to your email here by the end of this upcoming week. I am going to drop in the chat one more time a couple of links in there. You'll see links to blogs and to websites, but you'll also see a link to a certificate of attendance for today's session. If you miss it as the chat is flying, I'll email it out as well. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful weekend.